Have some exciting things lined up today. I'm very grateful for Mr. Paul Varnedoe to join us of Macys. Give a little background on you and then I'll let you formally introduce yourself, because that's awkward if I just stand up here talking about you. So you're the Director of Organizational Effectiveness at Macys. Quick show of hands if you knew Macys had a presence here in Atlanta. Okay, about half, so surprise for the other half of you. Paul, you joined the organization about a year ago, and the reason that you did, and really the challenge you sought to take on, is the topic of today's discussion. We met probably several months ago now, and in some of our conversations, I was so interested in really why I thought you'd be a great speaker here, is that how you view disruption and how you took this really not having a ton of retail-specific experience, but really changing markets. For context, Paul has held VP roles at Equifax, so you were there for a handful of years, has done, spent some time in the startup world at Shop Visible, and then also been at other omnichannel brands like Delta and Manheim. Yep. So I think that's an interesting trajectory, because I always hear the question coming from retailers is, well, do you have retail experience? That's the favorite one. And I think that you're a perfect example that maybe it's better that you don't. So I will pause and allow you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at Macys.
Okay, great. Well, it's good to be here. In fact checking, you did well, so I commend you on that. Yeah, thanks for your time. Glad you guys showed up today. Again, I'm Paul Varnedoe. I'm at Macys, and I work in, now we've changed our name, so we were Organizational Effectiveness, and now we've moved to Organization and Process Optimization. So the longer title, they pay us more money, so that's how it works. No, so we call ourselves OPO for short internally, and we are sort of internal consultants that kind of focus on process improvement and getting better efficiencies within the organization, and we're tied to the technology group, but we work across the entire spectrum of the organization. So there's a team of 6 of us. We're spread in, we have offices, like I said, in Johns Creek. We have an office out in San Francisco where the rest of our group is, but Macys also has offices in Ohio and in New York City. So trying to get all of the teams kind of aligned to some of the process that we do is really what we're focused on. And so when this opportunity came up for me last year, it was really more to focus on their Agile transformation, which I have a lot of experience in, and kind of moving the ball on their lean enterprise model that they've started on the West Coast. So we've got some lean labs that we've set up, and I work with a cross-functional team to kind of guide them from from a coaching perspective, as well as from our PMO. We've got some representatives from there, and then our product space as well. So a good group that we're kind of moving the needle on our maturity. And so we've started our transformation from Agile about on the East Coast here about probably 2 years ago, and started doing some testing and some small things. So really building on that experience and driving some consistency and really kind of leveraging some of the tenets of the lean startup, where you build and you measure, and then you learn and sort of you adjust from there. So that's a lot of what we're doing at Macys. Retail space is ever changing, as you guys are all aware, and my personal background, I'm not a big shopper, so I'm not the shopper in the house. So it's been interesting to kind of see from the technology side what retail is going through, as well as kind of experiencing that from the front end as well.
Yeah. So talk a little bit, if you can, just to give some context. I thought this was interesting, and you touched on it a little bit of how you're located all over and driving that change. I think that probably a lot of people here can empathize with fragmented departments and geographically, or even just sometimes the silos that exist within a company.
Yeah.
So when you say Agile transformation, talk to me a little bit about where different parts of the business live. I know that you have, for instance, e-com versus brick and mortar. Can you give a little lay of the land of that? And then specifically around your team, what is that team comprised of? What is cross-functional, and then how you guys are taking on some of those initial charges?
Okay, sure. So our .com operations based in San Francisco. They started the Agile transformation about 7 or 8 years ago, and so they've got really kind of focused on what we're delivering for Macys.com and for Bloomingdale's.com. A lot of that was driven early on into that Agile space. And the back-end offices that we have here in Johns Creek and in Ohio really were more legacy systems, so it was not as easy to sort of move things around. So we had really kind of starting that experiment from the West Coast side and figuring out what's going to work for us. What does that Scrum model look like? Do we follow SAFe? Do we look at some other things? Are we doing Kanban? So those are questions that we kind of vetted out early on with the team out in San Francisco. And so those lessons learned we then brought to the East Coast here, and we call it Macy's Tech East and Macy's Tech West. But it's all one organization now. They've done a really good job of integrating the groups and kind of rolling them up under our new CTO. So with respect to our Agile transformation, we've got we have a set of coaches that we have here in Johns Creek as well as in San Francisco. And we have some part-time coaches that are also Scrum Masters. And so rolling them out to small dedicated teams is really what we're starting to do now and test to see how do we get that shifting from project-based work that's deadline-driven and the scope can't change to more of an iterative model that we can then push things out more quicker. Have those monthly releases or even every 2-week releases like the iterations match up to, and seeing what works. Getting that minimum viable product out there and leveraging that. And if it doesn't work, then you shift it around. But having a good product organization to help drive the backlog and prioritize that work is really essential. So that cross-functional team that we have is really kind of working with not only our product side and our technology side, but also our program side to manage our resources.
Excellent. I'd love to just see a quick show of hands. Agile, Kanban, backlog. We heard a lot of very technical pieces.
There,
yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah. Familiarity in the room. If you really are familiar with it, raise your hand. Okay, so a good percentage of people here. I always like to do a gut check to make sure that we're talking in the same language.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's a couple things that I find interesting with Macy's. One, kind of the mandate that you all have made publicly of the transformations you want to undergo. I think all of us know the Amazon effect, whether you're in retail or not, you feel it. You guys probably feel it tenfold. And then how that kind of thinking is an innovation practice in many ways. People borrow a lot of times from Lean and Agile, and you're doing it from a technology perspective. So I would love just to hear organizationally the culture and the appetite around that. And you don't have to get specifics, no name calling of people within the company, but just understanding retail is a very traditional kind of legacy business in many ways. It's, especially from a brick and mortar, and bringing those people with you through that transition. There's a lot of domain knowledge, a lot of value in that, but it also helps to have people like you that are coming not from that world. So what is that kind of meshing of the new versus the old, and helping shepherd through that transformation look like, technology or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We talked earlier about it's not just retail, right? So I came from the airline space, and I was in the automotive space and Manheim auctions, and they're actually really similar to what we've got at Macy's. Airlines they've got an airport and they've got their operations there. How many people remember what a city ticket office is? Yeah, so those were places you went to pick up your airline tickets before you actually had a phone that could do it for you, right? And so a lot of those things had to change in the airline space. Same thing with Manheim. We had almost 100 auctions that were physical. They moved the cars through the lot, so every dealer had to show up there in person to look at the cars, test them out, see it, feel and smell, and make sure that's what they wanted to buy. And obviously the internet, the disruptors changed a lot of that. So we saw a lot of just generational changes with that, where you had experienced, seasoned dealers that were in the business for 30 years, and they could look at a car and tell you what's wrong with it just by seeing it, or how much it's actually worth. And we saw dealers, their children that were coming up into the business that were more embracing newer technologies. And so we would see, the parents that would come into these auctions and they wouldn't even touch their phone. And then their kids would come in and they would hate being at the auction. They'd I live in Macon, and I want to just be able to use my phone or use my desktop and buy 20 cars this morning and get back to doing my work. Whereas the older guys would, hey, I can network and I can meet and greet just like what we're doing here today, and you can make some business deals there. And so it's a very different model, and you can't just say, well, the internet's going to make these physical auctions disappear. It's how do you get that omnichannel experience, and how do you leverage both of those? And Macy's is no different. I think you've got, obviously, there's a lot of challenges in the retail space, and Amazon, they've got half of all the e-commerce transactions now, which is great. And Amazon is fantastic at what they do. But they also bought Whole Foods, but not because they're killing it in e-commerce, right? They want a physical space as well. You can go and use lockers for that. So Macy's is trying to leverage the retail space that we have. We've optimized the number of stores that we have, and we're also leveraging our online space and getting that omni-channel experience. So one of the examples I was thinking about after we talked was I went to Macy's with my daughter to pick up a pair of sunglasses I ordered through LensCrafters, which is they're one of our lease space vendors, and that's one of the things that Macy's is doing to try to leverage that real estate. And while we were there, she looked around and she wanted to find a dress for a sorority rush or something she was looking at. and didn't find one in her size. And I said, well, let me just pull out the Macy's app, and so scanned a little ticket, and I could see actually her size was available online. I just put it in our shopping cart and bought it right there. So being there in person, seeing it and trying on, knowing that this is the right size that she had, really helped kind of blend those two experiences together, even though we were obviously a generation apart. So I think it's really just finding that right balance between them. Macy's is looking at a lot of new technologies, and you know, they've made some announcements as well, and I can't go into a lot of details
Sure.
on it, but you know, just trying to get some of that blending in the stores. You know, our CEO announced that we're going to be doing some self-checkouts in the stores. So with your mobile app, you can actually check out and not have to wait or try and find, you know, a checkout place in there. There's buy online, pick up at the store, or ship to a store options that we're doing now, and really rolling those out. So a lot of new things that we're trying. And then back to that Agile mindset, most of you have got experience in that, is trying things small, experiment, and then modifying what you see with that. So we're doing some experiments in smaller stores, seeing what the uptake is with that, see how the buyer experience is, and then rolling them out to more and more stores. So that's kind of the effect that we're seeing in the stores.
Right.
And then certainly the back-end technologies that we're looking at, we're doing those every single week in our Agile teams.
Yeah. I always think that, so the examples you gave, that was great with your daughter in the store, and to your point, bridging that maybe generational gap. I think that that's getting really close to your customer. It's probably, you know, thinking of very specific use cases, really leaning into design thinking, who are we doing this for? And I think I'd be interested to know your perspective of, does the consumer lead those kind of experiences, or does the technology? Like, hey, we have this capability, how can we use it? And should, you know, are you going out scouting a bunch of tech and then saying, how do we implement it? Or is it saying, here's a customer need, now I'm going to go to our technology teams and see how we facilitate it? And I think I've experienced that kind of the cart before the horse of which one do we go seek first, and then drive priorities. So I don't know if you have any thoughts there, maybe even borrowing from your other roles.
The customer is always right, you know, so I think that's where it starts and where it ends. You know, I think you can drive innovation anywhere. It could be from your technology teams, it could be from your front-end associates, it could be from your competitors or just industry trends, or just, you know, your family and friends. I mean, there's a lot of places that invention and ingenuity can come from. And so it's a matter of just figuring out, what does that really look like to the customer? What's important to the customer? You know, there's regional differences too. Some people shop differently. And so really experimenting and finding that right mix. So that's really, I think, at the core of what we're trying to do, is just understanding that customer value. You know, and part of the Agile, you know, philosophy is you've got, you know, some really good visibility, because you've got, you know, your iterations going on every 2 weeks, and you've got the ability to adapt quickly. And so between those, you can actually drive customer value and reduce your risk, because you can move quickly and see the net effect of it. Right.
Risk is always something I find interesting, especially when you're dealing with direct-to-consumer business. So, you know, a lot of your background has probably traditionally been in a B2B space, and sometimes I think there's a level of transparency that comes with B2B, to say, go to your customers and say, we're doing this. I'd be interested to know, how do you all address the fear of risk and failure within your company, and you know, how are you kind of broaching that? Because especially with maybe more legacy employees or just processes, and I think that technology is a great place for it. Everybody's fine with it till it breaks, and then you're the enemy in the group. And so how do you how does your leadership, how do you maybe, I know you mentioned of starting small, but what does that kind of education or cultural change look like around it?
It is definitely a journey, and it's not easy for anybody going through change, because, you know, change inherently has a level of conflict involved.
Of course,
you've got, you know, things that are already being done, and people are good at doing that, and then you want to change things, they have to relearn it, and some of their skill sets erode, and some of their you know, their reputation, their view as a subject matter expert goes away a little bit. So so there's a lot of that we really have to kind of take into account. But just understanding that we've got good leadership in place. We've actually made some changes within Macy's, and they really are embracing, you know, this innovation and new technology and trying new things is really good. I think having some existing leadership there that understands the context of where Macy's is and where they've come from is certainly a good balance. But it's a message we have to continue to drive, and to make sure that the communication is there, that the transparency is there, and then the results. You know, as you go through and you experiment with some of these things, you know, if something works, great, build on that, share that information, and have people stand on your shoulders rather than reinventing the same things. And if it breaks, you have to have the trust with your leadership to really know that you're not going to get fired for doing this. You know, that it's, you know, you win together, you fail together. It's no different than a football team or any other, you know, sports analogy you want to use. So I think that having the right leadership in place that embraces and understands that is really good. But changing that culture doesn't happen overnight. We've been doing this transformation here on the East Coast for coming up on 2 years now, and we're still having to go through some of the conversations and why are we doing this and what's the value of that. And so it's no different. I saw that at Equifax when we built the Agile teams there, and they were obviously their bread and butter is credit reports, and we couldn't touch that system for anything. So we tried with smaller, different business units, saw some success there, and then rolled that out to more and more of the group. So that's really what that's how we've seen success in the past.
Excellent. Well, I've done a lot of talking. I do want to make this a dialogue. I'll open it up to the audience if there's any questions or feedback on anything Paul's mentioned, and then we can keep going. If not, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Macy's 800 plus stores. You have 10 or 12 stores in Georgia. With the e-commerce platform program, any need to eliminate stores?
I'm not going to be able to answer a lot of those.
I know, because the reason I ask that is that you do like $15 or $16 billion in annual sales. One store, your 34th and Herald Square store, does $1 billion.
Yeah.
I know you're getting a lot of pressure from Wall Street to reduce the store count. Can you comment on that as far as any direction?
Didn't plant him. I'm sorry.
Who are you with? No. I really can. I mean, is that? Yeah. So I really can. I mean, I'm part of the technology group, so my speculation is probably the same as yours and what you read in Wall Street. I think that just the store count. I think we get to an optimized level, and where it makes sense to close stores or where it makes sense to keep stores is really a business decision that we'll look at. And the flagship store you mentioned in New York is phenomenal. It's I know I sound like Trump now, right? It's the greatest store ever, but there's a lot of ingenuity coming out of that store that I think really drives a lot of the optimization in the company. So as far as store balance, I think it's really just a matter of looking at the numbers and figuring out where it makes sense.
Totally.
You guys have been charged with transforming the way Macy's does things. How do you overcome the roadblocks? I'm sure just like any other big corporate, you can also close stages in case the recruitment phase. How do you get around that? How do you change their minds? Do you?
It's kind of multifaceted, right? You change them at a team level. I think that's really, in some ways, the easiest way, because you've got your software developers that are continuing to just write code. So if they can focus on doing one project at a time or looking at the next 2 weeks, they'll love it. For middle management, it's probably the toughest sell because they're having to change from I own the P&L and I own my resources to I'm now coaching these people, making sure they got the right things at the right time and understand the training. And then the leadership level, I think at the highest levels, they understand you're going to give me more value. I like that. Tell me more. And so really getting those 3 levels connected in is just it's a matter of managing the communication. It's sharing the wins that you got, and it's also sharing some of the missteps that you may take and understanding what happened with that. Here's what we thought. Here's how we're measuring it. But I think just transparency, communication. You can never have enough of that, and that's some leaders understand that more than others. And from company to company, you have some that are really embracing it, and others that are just remain to be convinced. So there's no secret sauce. There's no magic bullet for any organization. It's really a matter of just working together and making sure that the team's aligned.
Yeah, it's definitely a people game. Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah.
I have a question about how Macy's thinks about one view of the customer across all the interactions, whether it be in-store POS or online or any of the marketing interactions a customer can take. As we think about how to really serve people with more personalized content, really understand them. How does Macy's think about that? Have you already transitioned? How did you do that with kind of legacy systems into one?
So I think there are certainly different personas that we have for our target customers, and I think that whether it's in the store or whether it's online, those have to be defined because I think there's a balance between the two. So I don't spend a lot of time. I'm not part of the product organization or part of the sales organization. So there are definitely ideas that they have and how they target our sector. I think the majority of our customers are women, so they target how what's important to them and how they shop. And I think there's a lot of the store logos that we bring in that has a certain fan that comes into the store or buys online. So does that answer your question? Probably not. But
I mean, I think a little bit maybe from the marketing standpoint, you think about personas, but maybe from the tech side, maybe the data collection, storage matching you guys might do to have a singular view of each individual customer, if you do that.
Yeah, there are some of the personalization technologies that we're looking at, and kind of weighing, how do we sort of target. Online is certainly much more direct in terms of how you can personalize that, and I think trying to balance that in the store as well without sort of being, creepy. You wouldn't want people coming in and saying, "How was your Starbucks this morning?" And you're like, "Whoa," So, but I think there is some personalization that we can do within the stores that are going to be certainly useful. And it's about building that experience coming into the store, because if you can buy something online, why would you go into the store unless there's a different experience that you value? That's critical to that.
Go ahead, Chris.
So you talked about your organization being focused on optimizations, and you talked about having leadership support, and you also talked about those levels of management and how you have to influence these people. Are there any stories you could tell us or examples you could share with us around an optimization you guys identified or an improvement that you're like, this is going to be great, but then it's just roadblock, pushback, nobody wants to do it? How do you leverage that leadership support?
How do you push through it?
And maybe
push through, yeah.
I'll say it doesn't even have to be specific to Macy's, because I know you've taken on similar roles in other organizations that maybe we would be aware of those kind of changes at this point. So whether it was Manheim or Delta or Equifax or Shop Visible, so maybe that would help be able to talk about it a little bit more freely if it's just in your career, because I think that's probably unanimous across the board, no matter the organization.
Yeah, I mean, so at Shop Visible was a startup, so there wasn't really legacy systems, and we had a SaaS application as a software as a service, so it was all online. So you can move really quickly, and I think the technology folks understood, what we could do to make quick changes, so there was less hurdles there. And there wasn't a shareholder group that you had to sort of report to every 3 months. I think at Manheim we had a challenge early on where we had these auctions, and we wanted to sort of replicate what the eBay experience was for buying cars. And there was a lot of constraints we had within the organization around financial controls and resources, and how do we recruit the right people and move people in and out. And so we really just stood up a separate company and really made that be, a separate, P&L itself. They funded some seed money, almost like a startup. And that was really the ideal situation to get that group off the ground, bringing in a consultant, having them kind of drive a lot of the innovation that they did for Manheim.com and OB.com and that simulcast application that we had. So it was, that was probably the best way to do it, but not every company is set up to do that. So you're going to deal with hurdles, and we're dealing with that at Macy's. So it's just, again, it's a matter of just trying to educate people. If you can get to a point where you've got a sponsor at a leadership level that understands, okay, this is important. And I think it's also helpful, obviously in the retail space, you've got a big, competitor out there that people realize this is going to be important for us to make changes. So that helps a lot as well. But really just finding that right sponsor and being able to have your business plan together. Here's what we're measuring. Here's what we're going to do. Here's our roadmap of what we want to do. And here are milestones that we're going to be reporting. So those are the key things that we've seen be successful.
I think that's sometimes the process in general. That sounds, like an ideal situation. Figuring out what KPIs are meaningful to all the stakeholders, I think sometimes is hard, and explicit alignment on that. Whereas you may say, well, if we just have intent from our partners to sign up on it, versus others saying there has to be the revenue tied to it, versus others saying it has to be technically compliant, or whatever that might be. Any sort of insight or word to the wise on how you create that alignment? Do you co-create KPIs? Do you come up with them and then justify them to the business? I mean, what has been some of your experiences?
It usually comes from the business about what they're trying to do. Our product organization is really good about trying to define what is that. We talked about personas earlier. What is this we're trying to go after? Does this move the needle? Are we doing things the same way, or do we need to shift them up a little bit? And then having a way to measure that is critical as well. Sometimes it's building a simple dashboard. Sometimes it's expecting reports to be done. But defining those and capturing those are only two parts of the equation, right? You still have to act on those. A lot of companies can be really good at collecting that, but they don't necessarily act on it. So if your gas gauge is empty, you better stop at a gas station. So it's driving that behavior change is really important. So that's from a KPI perspective. We have a lot of metrics that we measure in our Agile transformation teams around velocity and burn down and burn up charts. And what do those look like? And then there's intangibles around, are the teams happy? Do they enjoy working together? Do they go out and have a drink after work, or do they not even talk to each other? So you can kind of tell the health of the team, with some of those intangibles as well as the direct metrics that we measure.
for sure. Thank you for that. Oh, Hillary?
Can you speak to your experience, not necessarily at Macy's, but just generally on cross-functional versus pooled resource teams?
Yeah, I see benefits to both. The cross-functional teams are really good if you've got to get something done pretty quickly and you've got a broad spectrum of scope that you've got to deal with. But then you get into some of these subject matter experts, and they're not always consistent across all the teams, and so you have to manage that resource pool a little bit differently. We do have a PMO at Macy's, and so we try to measure, what the right skill level is for the particular role, and we're also trying to standardize in some of the back-end technologies that we have, because we have a lot of different disparate technologies and legacy systems, and Equifax and Delta were no different. So I think there's benefits to each. I think it just needs to be, tailored to the organization and what's really successful for them. But I think that having a cross-functional team is good to move things quickly when you need to. But I think a talent pool, if you've got some consistent technology and you've got some understanding of what can be built, then you can source them a little bit differently.
So if I'm hearing that, it's understanding the intent of the project and then being able to figure out, it's
Yeah.
not kind of mutually exclusive, which one works best.
I've seen both work well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Go ahead.
So with blockchain technology and larger CPG firms, obviously the biggest thing that's going to happen is supply chain transparency. Have you guys thought about your strategy in terms of who you'll be partnering with, or what sort of agnostic causal purposes that you'll move towards?
I'm sure that we have, but it's not part of my realm of expertise at Macy's. So it sounds like you've got some background in that or some understanding.
Lots. It'll be here within the next 5 years, but big CPG, it will take them literally 3-4 years to start thinking about, do I invest in my supplier network to help them get to a point where we want them to be transparent, or do I forget my supplier network and move towards more linear, vertically aligned, integrated organizations? And both of those take time. And with big CPG folks like you, you're dealing literally thousands of vendors.
Yeah. Blockchain is great. There's a lot of advantages to moving to that technology, and I think every company that collects data and has some transactional component to it is really looking hard at how do we leverage that technology against what they've already got. And it's just a matter of timing and spend, right?
Kohl's recently stated that they're excited because if you like a dress that you buy, you can actually go and tip the seamstress who's in a different country and say, I really love this, and you can actually physically pay them. So that's what they're excited about.
So they're using it as a consumer experience play and leaning into that. Go ahead, Dan.
I think many of us have large organizations with many different teams, agile teams. You mentioned as part of your role as driving optimization across those teams. So can you talk a little bit about what criterion you find most that you use to prioritize which teams you're going to try to coach and transform next in your pipeline?
Yeah, again, it's, we have quite a few applications that drive our Macy's technology, and so when we were first looking at it, we didn't want to have something that touched 35 different applications. So we started small, and we started with if we had a team that was rolled up under a single VP, that was where we wanted to focus our energy on, so we could kind of contain that resource to focusing 100% on that project for that team. So that was where we started with. As we rolled out some of the bigger projects, you had just really having those teams kind of splitting up those applications and the delivery pieces, whether it's front end or whether it's back end. They would then kind of work together, rolled up with what we call a triad concept between our product management group, our technology group, and then our program management group. And so that kind of three-headed brain trust is really where a lot of the prioritization took place. And then they make those decisions and then disseminate that out to all the teams. We use Scrum of Scrums and all the other things that tie in with the Agile tenets and ceremonies and methodologies. But that's having that triad really helped us kind of solidify where things are across that particular program.
Project management, product management, tech. Those are three.
Program management, product management, and then the tech leads. Yeah.
John?
So you yourself came in your career at the tail end of one CEO to a new one. How was that for you and your team? Was it a big transition, big culture shift? Have you been supported with what you were doing? whose kind of picture was your team?
So for me personally, it wasn't a big change because I'm new to Macys. For others that I work with, it was a big change. I think that, and I can't speak to the past, chairman and some of the infrastructure they had in place, but I think, Jeff is really focused on trying new things and thinking outside the box, and that's really encouraging for us that are leading some of the change management in the organization. That kind of permeates down. Says, well, if our chairman is talking about this and really, interested in wanting to do new things, then that's something that we can do at our team level as well. We brought in a new president, Hal, who's got experience at eBay, and at Home Depot we got a new product officer, we got a new CTO. So there's a lot of change that's happened. People can look at it and say, well, there's a lot of turnover, what's going on in Macys? But I think the people that we have brought in have the right mindset and the right understanding of what needs to happen to make things better for the organization. So I'm encouraged. I really am. And like I said, I've only been in retail space for a year, but I really have enjoyed this journey, and it's in a lot of ways from the IT side has not been terribly different from the other industries I've been in. It's just matching your demands up with the customer and what they want, having some of the transformation work with legacy systems. It's all pretty much the same on the back end. So
yes, retail's an interesting, sometimes volatile and crazy, but often very fun space, for sure. I have a couple questions I think I saw in the group. Any more hands? Let's go ahead. Go ahead, Lindsay. We'll jump through those and then jump back into some of the other topics we've talked about before. Go ahead.
I'm just fascinated at your continuous journey across industries. You clearly gravitate to change management and lean into that. And knowing that you're going to retail, it feels familiar to me because I'm like, okay, what's next? Like, what have I never tackled before? So my question to you is, as you're finding areas of internally productive disruption, if I can call it that, right? Not just moving from legacy to modern day, but the gentleman over there asked about some of the challenges. Tell me one of your most favorite wins across any of the companies.
That's a good question. There's been a lot over the years that have really been good. I think when I was at Equifax, we had a really innovative group up in DC. It was one of the acquisitions that Equifax had quite a few years ago. And the development team I managed were really good at operating in that agile mindset. They all trusted each other, so that dynamic was really pretty special. And so bringing that mentality back to not only other parts of the Equifax organization, but I understand what a good, healthy team looked like. So now as I'm rolling this out into Macys, I have a good picture of what a healthy team and what our goal really looks like. And I can talk to individuals about, here's what it means to be a good team member. Here's what it means to be trusting, other people, and when, you're all in this together. So that's, it's not a singular win like you're talking about, but I think it's that mindset is really where I've been able to sort of collect that across the different industries. There's been a lot of good wins that we had at Manheim as we rolled out our online, especially the simulcast app was really pretty cool because it embraced a lot of video technology, so you could actually look at the cars as they go through the lane on your computer and be able to check that out. One of the things that we did too was with, we had MMR was like our pricing tool, and it was great because you could see it, on the screen and all that, but in the lanes, it was harder for you to really tell exactly what an MMR car was, especially as going through the lane. So we implemented a mobile tool with a scanning app to it, and you could just scan the VIN, and it would tell you right away what the car was, what it was worth, what it's gone for. So that was really a pretty cool thing for the company to do.
So it sounds like team building and knowing what that looks like, helping affect culture in that space, and then also using new technology and using it to really enhance a business. Very cool, very cool. Go ahead, Kevin.
So you said a lot of great examples about changes within process and technology and product development that are really great that support innovation. Just curious if at Macys or in your previous companies there have been any specific initiatives that you can talk about addressing a culture that supports innovation at an enterprise level, as opposed to that potentially being the hopeful byproduct of changes in process and technology adoption and things like that.
Yeah, it's really important to partner with your HR organization, and if you're changing culture, sometimes it's easy to change within the existing group that you've got. Sometimes as you bring in new people, you want to have people that embrace that new type of culture and those traits that you have. So you can't always change a lot of people in terms of their behavior, but you know, the steps we talked about before about showing kind of what the value is and how that benefits the organization is good. But partnering with the HR group was also how we wanted to interview and the kind of the gems we're trying to find out in the marketplace to bring in and help kind of, you know, foster that new culture and that behavior. So partnering with your HR folks is really critical.
I think to build on that, it's also the incentive that goes along with it and operationalizing that. You know, you talked about new leadership coming in, CEO, CTO, some of these new folks, and they may be energized by it. They may be up there, you know, speaking to the organization of this is how we're going to do it differently. But people at the end of the day often still have their day jobs. And so change, while it could be that's exciting, that's great, maybe at my next gig, when they're looking at what they're judged on today, if it's not accounted for of how are you also helping the organization change, I think that often it leads to a lot of fingers crossed and wishful thinking, but not always action.
Right.
And so I think the HR organization as well as the executive leadership to then, you know, I anecdotally at least we can say we've seen you have to build in incentive mechanisms and how people are being judged, whether it's in annual reviews, how they're building their team, to tangibly show that. Otherwise, I think that it's really difficult to operationalize that at scale.
Yeah, the performance you know, metrics are certainly critical too. I know that we've not necessarily Macy's, but in other places, we've actually put into our performance reviews sort of some objectives and some things that sort of you're measuring that culture and that awareness, as well as some tangible things that they can actually work on. And so having that in your review certainly makes it real for them. So that's been another tool that's been well.
Yeah. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about your own personal brand within Macy's, right? Because transformation leaders that come in, either they are the new change agent that the new CEO brings in, so you're part of the team. So how you were perceived initially? Were you the radical, hair on fire guy that was just here as kind of a, coming in and taking over, and we're going to be out in 18 to 36 months? Or talk to us about how your reputation changed and your relationships inside the company changed over time, because this, I think, is a key challenge for a lot of either innovation or transformation leaders.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have been pretty fortunate because the group I came into, the OPO group I described earlier, they've kind of been known as change agents in the organization. So that brand has already been established, and for a lot of leaders, they've got their day jobs and they don't have the time or the bandwidth or have the resources to come in and drive some of that change. So they've actually been really appreciative to having somebody from OPO come in and say, okay.
So they're grateful you're supporting the line with the business, like thank God you're here.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, but I know what you're saying about where you sort of have, especially if you bring in outside consultants and come in, they're there for a certain period of time.
Better, faster, cheaper, headcount reduction, and
yeah.
You don't care about the future of the business and their future.
Right. There's a playbook that you can kind of tell that they're going through, and so having resources that are part of the Macy's team and are there for the long haul, I think makes a big difference in terms of, hey, we're all in this together. It's not just you're the next gig and in 16 or 18 months you guys are going to be gone, but so that definitely helps for us. I haven't seen a lot of the real pushback. It's really been pretty cooperative and pretty accepting about what we're doing.
That's great. Thanks.
Go ahead.
At first, thank you for coming out and sharing all this wisdom. I have three quick sub-questions. Could you just for a minute discuss, how should I say it? When you deal with human behavior at scale, like how do you ensure that what you're seeing is really what you're seeing? In other words, like how do you the verification and validation of some of these things? So for example, a convenient narrative might be Amazon is killing us, but there's another competitor named Zara doing fantastic. Like, so how do you, especially like for example, his example with Macys in New York and a store down here. I've actually been to that Macys from New York. And there's a whole list of contextual variables that contribute to that $1 billion. It's tourism. There's so many different. It's not just whatever you learn there. I'm sure it's not going to be helpful in Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
How do you contribute to that strategic discussion? So, like, how would you like to contribute?
I think it's a good point. Yeah, because it's the 34th Street Herald Square Macy's is very different than the one you go to at Perimeter Mall or at North Point. And the clientele is different, and you're right, there is a different level of traffic. But I think it still comes down to relationship building. That's where I've really kind of found that honest dialogue in understanding, are we making a difference, or are we still dealing with, some concerns. So building those relationships across the organization has been really critical for me to get an honest feedback without people feel like they're selling out or you got a mole planted in one of the departments. It's really, it's back to being a partnership. And that's been, I think, critical. I don't think you can really establish yourself and build that trust without sort of having that equal conversation with anybody that you're dealing with. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Any other questions from the group? Did you have one? Yeah, go ahead.
You touched on this a little bit, and you talked a lot about leading up. But when you hit those hurdles and challenges and failures, what do you do to keep your team that looks to you for leadership, to keep them motivated and excited about what you're doing and accomplishing?
Yeah, we drink a lot. No, it's a reality. There are hurdles you're going to run into, and you've got to be, as a leader for whatever change that you're going through, you've got to make sure that you remain positive, that you're encouraging, and that you're not disappointed with what I consider temporary setbacks. I think if the value is there and the numbers match up to what you're trying to do, it's just a matter of time before people can kind of understand and come around to it. And some people, they never really handle change. I've seen in 3 different organizations where people just can't handle it, and they just leave. It's no different in some of the the great brands that you see. Like, why would you ever leave that company? Well, it just didn't work for them individually. So you're going to have some attrition. It's some you're going to have to make some tough decisions at times. But just having that positive outlook and always looking for some new ways that you can kind of incent them and keep them motivated is really critical, because they do look for you for guidance. And if you show your team's down by 25 at halftime and the coach is like, man, we're toast, I can't wait to get out of here, the team's not going to respond in the second half. So you really have to have that that oversight and really kind of rise above a little bit and find those small wins.
My takeaway is a lot of sports references as well.
I'm a sports fan.
Is what I'm getting here. Any other questions from the crowd? Go ahead.
You mentioned kind of being an internal consulting team, and that business leaders reach for your team at times. They're happy that you're there to help with them. Are there any certain specific situations or scenarios that you see kind of trending where people constantly reach for your team to engage and pull in your team?
Yes. Yeah. There's more work than we can handle. So I think it's really the same as any other development shop. It's about prioritizing, what the work is, and sort of managing, some of the expectations of what we can do. We are, they kind of nicknamed us the parachuting chameleons, I think is what we're. So we sort of drop in and work with the team and really engage with them, but knowing that we're not going to be there long term. So it's setting those teams up to be able to run on their own. And so if we can't engage with them, we can still have some conversations and say, okay, here's some things that you guys might be able to try if you're willing to sort of, assign some resources to be able to push the change from yourself. So there's some things that we can do to help with that conversation.
How do you, I can imagine that there could be times where being pulled, even just to have this brief conversations of here are the things you can do, that can then be the distraction for some of those maybe longer term or bigger pushing things. And I think as a change agent organization, you're constantly, to Ben's point around brand, you're constantly trying to build that brand of, hey, we're here to help, we're here to empower.
Right.
You don't want to say no, but you also have to say no sometimes to be productive. And how do you, are there other parts of the organization that you lean into to say, hey, this goes in the product organization or the business organization, other parts, how do you broach that? Or at this point, are you in kind of brand development mode and you're helping everyone?
For me personally, it's really been just focused on our Agile and Lean transformations.
Right.
If there are other folks in the organization that can help out, I know that, my boss and that the other VPs understand kind of what's important. So I think it's just a matter of, again, figuring out what that prioritization looks like and what the value proposition is.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions from the group? Go ahead.
From a stock price standpoint, it's more or less doubled from October. What are you attributing to that, whether it's technology, whether it's the C-level and what they're pushing down to, to y'all? What are you attributing to the success?
I think it's the same time I've been there, so obviously you know what.
Be reflective in this year's bonus.
No, I mean, I think there's the stock did drop down to like 17, and it was pretty low. I think there are things that Wall Street's encouraged on, and again, I'm just talking from an individual spectator in Wall Street. I don't have any inside knowledge or whatever, but I think having the new leadership on board, making some good bets that have paid off. You know, there's some cost control that we did with some of the store closings, and I think that helped kind of our bottom line numbers. But still looking at top line growth, I mean, our .com's done really well. We're trying to innovate with new things. You know, we made some acquisitions this year. There's a company we bought called Story out of New York, and so there's some things that we're doing that are different to sort of build upon that in-store experience. And some of the other things that they've done really with backstage concept in some of our stores, to kind of, you know, look at some of the clearance type of you know, models. I'm not going to mention our competitors, but they're you know, looking to sort of build upon, you know, what we have in the store, and matching those up. So I think there's a lot of new energy in there. I think that you know, I know Penny's has not done well, but I think there's been other retail stocks that have kind of come up a little bit. So there's this ebb and flow, and I don't follow the stock market too much, just because, you know, one good quarter and your stock drops and makes no sense, and then there's, you know, some good, you know, good news that comes out of it, and then the stock will explode. So it's, you know, I think that we're making the right long-term decisions for the organization, and I think that's probably, you know, shown up in the value of the stock.
Any other questions from the group before we kind of close out today? No? Everybody got there? Go ahead.
How do you foresee the e-commerce platform will be impact to your physical store?
I look at it as complementary, honestly. I think that, you know, there's a great functionality with, you know, you go online and you can pick up things at the store if you need it that day, if you don't want to pay for shipping, or if there's other things that prevent you from, you know, having something delivered. You know, we sell a lot of big piece furniture, and, you know, it's not always convenient to go to the showroom to see that. So we're doing some things in the digital space to kind of see how you can, you know, buy a bed or a furniture set and see what that looks like. So I think it will continue to be complementary. I think that we're attacking both and really providing as much of a good customer experience as we can on both sides.
Do you also have any plan to implement technologies in the physical store?
Yes. So we, I can't remember, we talked earlier if it was a prior conversation, but just having like some of the checkout pieces, you know, in the store. So that's some of that. I think there's, you know, we're doing a lot with RFID to sort of track, you know, retail pieces and to get inventory numbers out of that. There's a lot that we'll be doing, I think, as technology presents itself, you know, whether it's in the predictive analytics and the artificial intelligence space. There's a lot that we can be doing with that. So, but it's not something I'm really privy to what we're working on, but I think there's a lot we'll be doing. I think that, again, with our leadership we talked about, I don't think they're taking anything away. I think where it makes sense for us to add value to the customer, we'll do it.
Go ahead.
Culture. You go to JCPenney's headquarters, you know, Plano, Texas. It's like dead city there. They're there from 9 to 5. There's no vibe. There's no activity. You know, it just reminds me of going to Walmart. Okay, you go to Target on Nicollet Avenue, 2-story atrium space with gigantic Chihuly sculpture hanging there. Lots of buzz, lots of activity, lots of good vibe going on there. How is Macy's going to address the cultural shift that I believe, you might not, that needs to happen corporate-wise to advance itself?
Again, I think that, you know, from a store perspective, I can't really address that. I don't really know, but I think from a culture perspective at, you know, our back office, as we start to see the teams gel and working together a little more effectively, we're starting to see a different level of energy. You know, we're doing a lot in terms of how our physical space is to kind of, you know, bring them more up to date and more modern. So I think that's helped in terms of our collaboration. I think that's, you know, I can't really speak to what you saw at Penny's, but there's definitely a shift in energy that I can see in the last year that I've been at Macy's. You know, there's been a lot of change that's happened internally, and I think so the people that are embracing it are really happy to see it.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that probably plays into a whole talent acquisition and retention strategy as well,
yep.
And then making sure, I know we work in team models as well, and with our company, once you have those teams established, then you know what environment they want to be in and which facilitates that collaboration, how to lean into that, and it may not be the same from team to team or office to office. There may be general things you can do, but once you get those people and that culture developing, it's kind of a cart before the horse. What does the culture demand, because you don't have it developed yet.
The team should also have their own identity as well, so
Right.
you can't just kind of blueprint every single one. You know, one of the things we've just started up recently is just having the teams name themselves, not just be Project X. It's like they're Team Avengers, and they're doing all kinds of things. It gives them some identity and a little bit of, you know, team pride, so they can do some things theme-wise with that. So just little things like that can really go a long way towards building that culture.
Yeah, I mean, that autonomous ownership of something, I think, you know, people generally perform better, give a better work product, and then, to your point, the identity that comes out of it. We've anecdotally seen that as well. So I think that, you know, if I had to draw out some things that we heard today, you coming from more of the technology organization, I think that there was probably a lot of interest around just general, like, kind of e-commerce and how, you know, omnichannel approaches, you know, what does all that look like? And I think retail is an industry that's very interesting right now, and we can probably all relate to, maybe more than some of the other industries that Atlanta's known for.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we all shop, we all, you know, have an Amazon account, we all go to Lennox and go to Macys or whatever that might be. But you thinking about it from the technology perspective, bridging the geographical gap, the team mentality, and I don't know that I think a lot of legacy businesses haven't always operated in a team. So doing that. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, your experience of just disruptive industries and you not being retail specific, but coming in and being able to maybe see it through a clear lens. I don't know how many other folks in your organization have a similar background as you, but I would urge folks that sit in these innovation roles to look in divergent spaces and see what are things that people have experienced that may be agnostic to your core business, and then bringing those people in, because you're going to get better thinking, different approaches that maybe just aren't the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any closing thoughts you might want to share with the group.
No, I just think from innovation, you know, it's when you're in a startup, there's a different energy level and there's different things you can do very quickly, but I don't think that you can really, as a blanket statement, say, well, big companies don't get innovation, because they really do. They just have higher barriers that they have to work through. And I think that the leadership usually gets it, and they understand the value in it. They have to kind of weigh that out with some of the other things going on with that organization. So, but I think that, you know, I mentioned earlier about the Manheim thing where they stood up a new organization. You're not having to sort of do, you know, crowdsourcing and, you know, venture capital funding and worried if you're going to make a paycheck in 6 months. You know, these are things that, as established companies, they have a little more longer term that they can actually fund some of these things and have a little bit more runway to see the success of this. And I think for the organizations that are really under attack, if you want to call it that, I think they're responding in a good way. So innovation does happen at the larger organizations, just a little different mind shift from, you know, what you're traditionally thinking of a startup.
Excellent. Any closing thoughts from the audience? Any other questions or feedback? And we'll be around for a little bit to answer any questions.
Sure.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining. Please join me in giving him a round of applause. Before you take off, I'm going to ask, as I do at many of these, for you to pull out your phones right now. I'm going to wait, so go ahead. Pull them out. I only see about half the people. All right. So please go to your calendar and mark August 16th. We are going to have John Donahue of Anthem going to be speaking with us. So Anthem's Innovation Lab is right across the way, talking to us about how they're approaching innovation. They, you know, anecdotally, just knowing the community here, they have one of the more sophisticated practices, and I think there'll be a lot of really interesting things. And hopefully our focus will be talking about how to take innovation ideas and operationalize them back to the business. And I think everyone here can probably empathize with that a little bit or find relevancy. I have a second announcement as well, and for those of you that hang out, thank you. So 352, we've been doing these events now for 2 years. Our services really support a lot of what you all do day to day. We have the community aspect, and starting in 2019, we're going to be launching a more explicit training and education service offering. And so I'm very, very excited to announce we'll be doing a Design Lab cohort. For those of you that may have attended our huddles in the past, they're industry roundtables around innovation theme or specific. I know with the automotive, some of the people in the room in payments have participated. We're going to be launching this to the community. It's going to be a paid membership done over a quarterly basis. And we're going to be bringing cross-industry folks together. The number one thing I hear from my clients is, well, what are the other companies doing? And this is a first row seat to see how the other companies are doing it. participating in a fairly low fidelity way to do that, exposing folks within your organization to this kind of thinking, so whether it's your innovation function or the core business. We're very excited. We have several of Atlanta-based companies signed up and expressing interest, and those spots are going to be filling up quickly to start January 2019. So if you have an interest, if your company, we have some companies that have come to us and said, we want to do this for our customer set. We want to bring in our partners and run one explicitly for that. Please feel free to come speak with us. We'd love to be, facilitators of that and help you realize how that could be. So thank you all so much. August 16th, don't miss it. It's going to be a great one. And again, thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it today.